So Zuleyka Valentin, she was born in Puerto Rico, but now she lives in Florida. She's a volunteer for the Women's Declaration, like Laura, that is our representative in Mexico. She works with Women's Declaration in the United States where she lives, but also she will show us what is happening with the transgenderism in Puerto Rico. She learned about radical feminism in her studies, and now she's about to finish her career about sexual studies. And she knows the threat that transgenderism also has for sexual education. Thank you and welcome. Hello to everybody. My name is Zuleyka Arroyo. I want to say thank you to Women International for connecting so many women across the world, for letting us be here to speak in a culture of cancellation. Thank you to the very brave women that you show your faces and you let everybody know your name. I'm not the first Puerto Rican that is here, but 1 year ago, one feminist that came here from Puerto Rico, she had to cancel her presentation to be published because of the threats of Puerto Rico. Women are harassed and threatened. They have no support. They are called transphobic. So the feeling of women in Puerto Rico is that there is no interest in protecting the women that are able to speak up. Puerto Rico is a colony not incorporated to the US in the Caribbean. That is, we are less than 4 million. The Puerto Rican policy is a democratic republic The Puerto Rico is divided into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, and established by the Constitution of Puerto Rico. The executive branch is headed by the government, who is advised by a cabinet of secretaries that are independent of the legislature. The government appoints with the advice and consent of the Senate and the members of the cabinet, which is made up of the secretaries of the departments. Due to Puerto Rico status as an unincorporated territory of the United States, its residents cannot vote in the nation's presidential elections. Politics in Puerto Rico revolves around a multi-party political system dominated by three primary political parties, although in recent years, new parties have been listed. According to the conservative sources, the introduction of the gender perspective was under the governmentship of the first governor, Silvia Calderón. She was one of the who installed the office of the Women's Ombudsman, introducing a gender perspective to combat the domestic violence. It is the government office dedicated to impacting public policies and programs aimed at ensuring the rights of women. Domestic violence is a type of gender violence that occurs with people who are or were a couple and between whom there was a consensual relationship. In Puerto Rico, justice for victims of gender violence, mostly women, goes unnoticed. Hence, the need to implement an educational curriculum with a gender perspective. In Puerto Rico, they have always talked about gender perspective, differentiating themselves from gender ideology with great impetus by professionals in the area of social sciences. They define the gender perspective as an analysis methodology which seeks to eliminate the stereotypes imposed by society, opening doors and opportunities, not only for women but also for men. This perspective, according to social professionals, questions the stereotypes with which we are educated and opens the possibility of building new contents of socialization and relationship between human beings. The United Nations also uses the gender perspective to denote the oppression of women. I believe that in the translation of information, the message is often lost or changed entirely. During my academic preparation as a sex educator, we differentiate between perspective and ideology using the definition of both concepts as antonyms, no, antonyms. The gender perspective is defended because, according to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, it's so to comply with the human and universal rights of sexuality, based on dialogue, truth, respect for differences, development of values, and positive attitudes. However, what has happened in Puerto Rico is a promotion of a gender ideology. The intent was to take a gender critical perspective, meaning that the professionals, law, and policies must take into consideration that our culture perpetuates gender stereotypes that oppress women in society. Gender perspective and gender ideology are the same compound word. However, perspective and ideology by themselves are antonyms. Gender ideologies, gender ideology for its part represents the vision of the fundamental ideas of queer theory developed by Judith Butler. This ideology has captured the intention to implement a critical gender perspective. The axioms of gender ideology include believing in the existence of a gender identity, believing that there are people who are born in the wrong body and that they should be treated, to assimilate their nonconformity and gender dysphoria, believing that gender stereotypes are what make a woman or a man, and deny differences and oppressions based on sex. In contrast, a critical gender perspective includes the acceptance, respect, and dignity of homosexual and non-conforming people with gender stereotypes, the acceptance and education of the body, and the right to attraction based on sex, not gender. When we talk about gender, we refer to the ideas, behaviors, expectations that a society or culture has about men and women. Many of these ideas are considered gender stereotypes and are not determined by nature, but are acquired through sociocultural learning. The Yoga Karti principles determine that gender identity refers to the internal and individual experience of gender as each person deeply feels it, which may or may not correspond to the sex assigned at birth, including the personal experience of the body, which could entail the modification of appearance or bodily functions through medical, surgical, or other procedures, as long as it freely chosen, and other expressions of gender, including dress, speech, and mannerism. Yogyakarta principles on the application of international human rights law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity, March 2007. The term sex is used exclusively for biological distinction. It is not assigned at birth. Sex is observed and unchanging. There are people who have decided to identify with the stereotyped ideas of what a man and a woman should be in the culture. Neither gender nor gender identity are protected categories in the Constitution of Puerto Rico. Article 2 of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution of Puerto Rico, Section 1 establishes non-discrimination based on race, color, sex, birth, origin, or social condition, or political or religion ideas. Section 3 establishes that no law relating to the establishment of any religion shall be passed, nor shall the free exercise of religion worship be prohibited. There will be complete separation of church and state. Section 4 establishes that no law shall be passed that restricts freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people to assemble in peaceful assembly and to ask the government to redress grievances. The laws of Puerto Rico have been adjusted to incorporate gender identity. In Puerto Rico, it is allowed to change your gender in driver's licenses and birth certificates, thanks to Executive Order 2015/029, sent by Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla. This allows people to identify themselves within categories they do not belong under because identification documents denote a person's sex, not their gender. The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico has failed to recognize that the demographic information provided on identification documents denote the sex of individuals, not their gender identity. This allows people to identify as the other sex. It allows men to identify themselves within a category that requires spaces, attention, and particular needs. When it is recognized that the oppression of women is due to reason of sex. Law 69 of 1985 was also adjusted, which guarantees equal employment rights by prohibiting discriminatory actions based on sex. It establishes that it is illegal for an employer entity to suspend or refuse to employ, dismiss, or discriminate with respect to employment for reasons of sex or any other condition among human beings. Then they amended the law to say gender in 1999 with law number 212. Law 22/2013 is the first legislation against employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in Puerto Rico. Establishes public policy against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in employment. It uses the reaffirmation of the dignity of the human being and that all the people are equal before the law as a constitutional premise. This law provides definition for both concepts, establishing that sexual orientation and gender identity are broadly interpreted to offer greater protection. They define sexual orientation as attraction based on gender, not sex. Sexual orientation, it is the capacity of each person to feel an emotional, effective, or sexual attraction for people of a gender different from theirs, or of the same gender, or of more than one gender. Gender identity, how the person identifies, how they recognize themselves in terms of gender that may or may not correspond to their biological sex or assigned at birth. Several laws of the Puerto Rican government are amended to conform to this public policy, including the anti-discrimination law number 100/1959 to include gender identity as a protected category when the Constitution does not mention it. General Order 624 of the Puerto Rico Police is created. Protocol for the treatment of transgender and transsexual persons created by Order 624 of the Puerto Rico Police Department. Approved on December 10th, 2015, this general order establishes the obligation to treat transgender and transsexual people with respect for their dignity and rights. The purpose of this general order is to establish the public policy and operational and administrative procedures for the employees of the Puerto Rico police in their interaction with transgender or transsexual persons in order to provide security, respect, and dignity to this community. The gender of the person will be advised through the legal name and what pronouns they prefer. They are allowed to use the bathroom of their choice according to their gender expression if the person fears for their safety. The person will also have the option to decide if they want to be searched by a male or a female police officer. So a policewoman will have to search a man who identifies as a woman if he requests it. It also forces the police to use inclusive language against their will, obstructing the constitutional freedom of speech. Law number 9/2020 complies all the rights of Puerto Rican women workers for reasons of sex in private and public industries.
También obliga a la policía a utilizar lenguaje inclusivo en contra de su voluntad, obstruyendo la libertad constitucional de la palabra. La ley número 9/2020.
Among the rights granted under the law, they are guaranteed that measures are developed and implemented to prevent them from being discriminated against in their place of employment, have a work environment free of hostile, offensive, or intimidating behavior related to any cause of discrimination. Do not tolerate verbal, physical, or electronic conduct that explicitly or implicitly makes unwanted approaches. That the employer keep the workplace free of sexual harassment and intimidation. All of us here know the consequences of raising our voices in favor of our basic rights. New privileges granted under the protection of sentiment expose women to hostile or vulnerable situations. Lastly, Puerto Rico wants to implement egalitarian education because they understand that education is the tool for the change. However, the curriculum has been criticized because it proposes an education with a gender perspective or gender ideology. Our vocabulary and perspective on healthy sexuality is taking a negative turn. A healthy gender identity is considered to be cisgender, meaning that you identify with the ideas of gender assigned to men and women in society, many based on sexist ideas. To support all of this, you have to believe that there is a gender identity, in an intimate feeling of oneself as a man, a woman, a mixture of both or neither, and that we are born in the wrong bodies. How is it that by validating feelings we protect women? If women want to educate against the imposed gender, why the need of amend a democratic labor law with unconstitutional elements? In addition, there are already two anti-discrimination laws on employment. Why protect an ideological concept like gender identity in the law? Are the citizens of Puerto Rico aware of these changes? Gender identity is the idea or feeling of a person in reference to their sex and gender stereotypes imposed by culture. The more you identify with a gender stereotype, the more you align yourself with feeling like that gender. And it is not a protected category under the Constitution of Puerto Rico, nor should it be compared with sexual orientation since both terms differ in their nature. Sexual orientation is attraction based on sex, not gender. With my message today, I want to invite mental and sexual health professionals in Puerto Rico to be critical of the queer narrative and its effects on our society and culture. I invite you to connect with feminist teachers for co-education if you are truly interested in developing a feminist co-educational curriculum, like the one proposed with the law 62/2017.
Les invito a conectar con docentes feministas por la coeducación de España. si están verdaderamente interesados en desarrollar un currículo coeducativo feminista como el que proponen con la Ley 62-2017. Gracias.